Yeah, we're going to just build on what the inspiration that we had last night. And we're going to do, obviously, a little bit more hands-on work in some small groups and really start to form connections and community to help you all bring your audacious ideas that I know you have for the future for your community and how to bring those to light. So that's what we're here for today. So pleased to introduce from Down Under our first speaker, Dr. Leyla Acaroglu. She is the founder of the UnSchool, the founder of the UnSchool, Swivel Skills, Disrupt Design, CEO of Circular Futures, and a United Nations Champion of the Earth. She's an internationally respected expert in sustainability and the circular economy, an educational entrepreneur, and an award-winning creative change maker. As a designer and sociologist, she weaves system thinking, sustainability sciences, and innovative approaches to develop global education, communication, business, and design interventions. So without further ado,
thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Sue. It is working. You can hear me? Do you want to get my levels up? I'm a pretty loud speaker, and we need to go all the way back to the beginning with these slides, if you don't mind. Take them down and back to the title slide. So I just want to start by thanking the organizers for having me. It's my first time here, not in the US, obviously, but in the Tetons. I definitely had a chuckle when I learned apparently what the real name meant, but I also want to start by acknowledging the First Nations communities. Guys, they're saying it's hard to hear me. Maybe you need to move your microphone up. They could just put my levels up, yeah? Are we good now? Better? Usually I'm oh yeah, there we go. You get my full dulcet tones. I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the tribes and communities who have for generations, perhaps centuries, have helped to conserve, preserve, and ensure that we have a beautiful place to enjoy today. I am from Australia, so I will say some words that you'll giggle at, that's fine. Hopefully you understand all my words, but I say aluminium, you say aluminum, I don't know. And I will possibly mention aluminium and methane. So I work in sustainability and design. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I'm deeply passionate about it. But my background is that I wanted to solve problems as a young person. So I became a designer. I actually studied product design, which is how everything is made, from the clothes you're wearing to the, well, to be fair, most product designers don't get into fashion, but the chairs you're sitting on, the pens you're using, the cars you drive. But midway through my design education, I realized that I was learning how to create products that had an impact on the world. In fact, it was a professor in engineering who told me about this thing called the Gaia theory. Anyone know the Gaia theory? James Lovelock? Right, everything in nature is interconnected, but fundamentally this one planet that we live on is a dynamic, interconnected organism, and that we are part of it. And it blew my mind open. Truly, at 19 years old, I had a massive existential crisis. I don't know if anyone else can identify, and then I decided to quit design school and go and study sociology, because I was like, I feel this is a human problem and I don't understand humans. And thankfully, I got this incredible education, not just in sociology, so the science, psychology of the human experience, neuroscience, the economics, but also I majored in sustainability, so looking at environmental impacts from the broader system. And then I ended up doing a PhD in industrial design and built a career as an entrepreneur. Because for me, I still wanted to solve problems. I just didn't want to make better remote controls, because that was one of the driving forces. Remote controls, how frustrating are they, seriously? What are all the buttons for? I still to this day cannot understand. Also, I have to say, I have been a professional speaker for 20 years. This has not changed. And they're ergonomically not comfortable to hold for a long period of time. And yet here we, as this design is this tool that we use to create things to meet human needs and to make things better, perform better. So I'm passionate about solving problems, specifically around how we design things to make our lives as humans better, but working within the systems that sustain life on Earth. And here's the challenge. Do we use this tool of design to solve problems or create them? Or a little bit of both? From my position, most design is done without any consideration of the broader impact that it has on humans and the world. In fact, a lot of design is done to intentionally manipulate humans because it is so effective at doing it. Most people do not notice a designed product or service or experience unless it's frustrating. We call that friction. Most design is frictionless. But how many times a day do you actually think, who designed this? And there's that little frustration. Well, the thing is that if you're just one person responding to a design artifact, could you imagine how many things that have been made in this world and how much of an impact it's having, both positive and negative, on not only the human experience, but also the broader system, the natural world, people in other countries. So we're trying to use design as a transformative tool. But we have actually, I'm not going to lecture you guys on any of the big environmental issues that we face, because I'm sure you're all extremely knowledgeable. But I find it fascinating the scale of which we have terraformed the planet to meet our needs. So right now we extract 100 billion tons of raw materials from nature every single year. And the biomass of all living things is now less than the built environment. Isn't that crazy? Like, we've built more things on this planet than there is left of nature. Your face is good. He's in shock. But he's 3 slides in. Right? It's crazy. And not only that, most of the impacts that we have are hidden. Who knows what the impact of any digital product is? So you can go to a website, AI, your ChatGPT, your emails. You know that there's a physiological, Jesus, sorry, it's very early in the morning. Physical, mixing physical and psychological, we'll get there. Okay, so there's a physical impact to everything we do on the internet. The internet is not some kind of invisible thing. It has physical servers that are produced, energy that is used to power those servers, and then of course heating and cooling. And some cool server companies are now doing things like taking the waste heat from their server farms and using it to like heat swimming pools in Sweden. So everything we do as individuals and as a collective whole has an impact on the world around us. Some of those impacts are really positive. You build a business, you create jobs, you help people have their autonomy over their lives. You make products that make people's lives easier, faster, better for whatever reason. But then at the same time, we also have these hidden impacts. And if we just take climate change and the approach that we're trying to use to overcome that, which is this idea of assessing emissions, most of the emissions are actually embedded in what we call scope 3, which is everything other than the energy production. So it's embedded in all of our products and services. And if you're a business owner, that means that the majority of your carbon emissions are actually hidden in the supply chain. And so we need to transform how we work together across the supply chain to minimize those impacts. And there's actually a lot of really progressive work happening in this space. I work a lot in Europe, and the European Union has a lot of laws, like almost enough to kind of be overwhelming. And most recently, they just implemented one called the Eco-Design Regulation, which applies to all products. Every single product now sold or made in the European Union will be required to respond to rules around repair, recyclability, remanufacturing. And one of the key parts of that is something called a digital product passport, which is a piece of technology that will require all products and materials to have a QR code or an RFID card that actually shares the life cycle impacts of that product or material. So that if you're producing this, hopefully you redesign it, but you would then be able to check the materials, so you'd be able to report on the environmental performance of your products. So we have full supply chain transparency. That's going to start coming online in 2026. So if anyone here produces products that sell into the EU, you need to be on it. But also, it presents this really fascinating challenge for somewhere like the US, where a lot of producers are selling their products into the EU. They might be materials or actual end-use products, but now this is going to be a global tool that we're going to have to figure out how to get everybody engaged in. Anyway, this, like, I don't know how you guys feel about the planet, but I definitely think it's pretty cool. Specifically, the fact that as of right now, it's the only known life-sustaining planet in the entire universe, which, like, magic. Also, anyone here know an astronaut? Or there's only about 500 or 600, although that is changing, but a real astronaut, not your kind of touristy astronauts. Anyone? Anyone know a real astronaut? Oh, you're so lucky, aren't they the best? Do you know about what the overview effect is? You know, because every astronaut, so there are about 500 or so official astronauts who have gone to space, and every astronaut talks about this thing that happens to them when they get out there into the infinite possibility of the universe, and they look back and they see this thing, and they go, oh my gosh, it's so fragile, so beautiful. I have goosebumps saying this to you. It holds every single thing that I love and care about. My pet dog, my kids, the dinners I love, and this infinite possibility has no other space or place like it. And so they have this transformative effect. It's been studied to say that the overview effect changes their entire perspective of what it means to protect, conserve, and live on this planet. And so I'm hoping in our time together this morning, we'll have a little bit of that effect, because we're going to go into the big infinite possibility of the universe and think about how we can apply that to this tiny little spectrum of our world and our life, and whatever power or influence you have in your work, in your careers, how we can transform that into a positive impact. Now, there's a lot of science that's coming out that's helping us understand exactly what's going on, the relationship between human actions and negative environmental and planetary impacts. This is some data out of Stockholm Resilience Institute. Really amazing scientists there have helped us understand that there are 9 planetary boundaries. Now, these are basically systems that, if pushed to a particular point, will have a consequential effect on all other systems. And you can see, based on these graphs, how that's changed over time. Obviously, climate change is a big one, but there are a few others that people don't even really think about, and one of them is the nitrogen cycle. Basically, I'm sorry, it's early in the morning, but I'm going to talk about poop. Like, the nitrogen cycle is essentially nutrients that are how nutrients flow through bodies of animals and humans, and ultimately how that accumulates and the impacts. So did you guys know that there's 450 dead zones in the ocean that are the result of eutrophication, which is the excessive amount of nitrogen in a body of water that encourages the dinoflagellates and other algae. You know algae blooms. You've seen an algae bloom, right? Yeah? So in that environment, they suck all the oxygen out of the water, and then that becomes a dead zone. So there's these vast swaths of the ocean where nothing can live because there's no oxygen in it. And that's directly correlated to animal production, food production. So factory farms making chickens for eggs and chicken burgers, basically all their poop rushes off into the waterways, creates this nitrification. Fun science in the morning, right, guys? So these are the kinds of systems that most of us have no concept of. And this is the kind of stuff that's going on. So obviously, the more we can explore these systems, the more we can have the food system we need, but done in regenerative and sustainable ways. So we're always trying to understand what we call externalities. Externalities are things that are not accounted for in the present system. So as it stands, our current economic structure that has a GDP-based engine does not allow for the services of nature. So if you want to make chopsticks, that's your business, and you go to nature and you cut down a tree and you put that into a factory to make chopsticks, the service of the tree in nature is not accounted for. Obviously, in where we are right now, there is a conservation overlay on nature because there is, in a way, a collective benefit by preserving it, right? But that's not the case in most environments. So logging a tree or extracting water from an aquifer, until it comes into the economy, it does not exist. So that means that there is no incentive to protect it. There's no incentive to be efficient with it. And not only do we not account for nature back at the beginning of the system, what happens at the end of life, once it's in a hole or it's escaped into the natural world? Also not accounted for. So what's crazy about our current system is that GDP goes up when there's a natural disaster because of all of the work that needs to happen to fix it. But GDP does not account for or care about the destruction of the natural world. It's crazy, right? Given that every single thing that exists in our lives comes from nature. Like, I would love to think we're alchemists, but we're not. We have to go to nature to take all the raw materials to make the things that not only power our own bodies and our societies, but also make the goods and services. So by not accounting for nature, we are essentially designing a system that does not incentivize any care or concern. We do not value nature as a species, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. And so one of the core goals of a lot of the UN activities right now is to actually value the natural world. So we have a lot of movements around nature positive. I don't know if you heard this, there was a declaration a couple of years ago by the UN, which is essentially about businesses actually understanding their nature-based impacts and designing their business operations to have a positive impact. But at the end of the day, not everybody is in a position of leadership. And I love talking. I talk to people all over the world, to high school students, to CEOs. I have a lot of Fortune 500 clients where I'm working with their senior managers and executives to figure out how they can transition their business to the circular economy. And it's the same, right? Every single person, doesn't matter who you are a citizen designer. What I mean by that is every single action you take in the economy has an impact. You are designing the world that we live in. Because having been at the tables with the designers and the engineers and the decision makers, everything they're choosing to make is the direct outcome of the actions of people in the society that they're serving. Right? So if you've clicked on an article, more of those types of articles. It's the algorithm of society. The more you interact with something, the more of X product you buy, the more of that we'll have, which is how we have ended up in this very hyper-disposable society. And I'm just going to refer to the disposability in relation to physical goods, not get metaphysical about, human love and affection and all the other things that we've started to become very carelessly disposable of, right? So essentially, we have a system that is addicted to disposability. Hear me out here. Most companies produce products that are not intended to last for a long period of time because they're incentivized to create and sell more of those products because their business model is moving products through the economy. And we've seen a lot of value be lost from everyday goods. Often warranties only last for 12 months. It's impossible to repair certain products. And in this system, not only has it exponentially increased waste, but it's also dramatically reduced nature's resilience because we're going back to the natural world to take those resources over and over and over again. So for everything we waste, something has to be taken. And not only that, the problem with waste, trash, whatever you want to call it, is that we pay for it. This is a commonly forgotten part of this system. We pay for waste removal from our homes to be mysteriously disappeared. Who knows where their waste actually goes? You do? I don't know where it goes from here specifically, but you do? Where does it go? Idaho. Okay. So most cities and communities around the world struggle to deal with their waste. That's a reality. You either dig a hole, bury it, landfill. You either burn it, either just straight burn it or burn it for energy, incineration, or you try to recycle it, often offshore, so most recycling is exported. And then when it gets to that third country, it is often not processed the way you would expect it, or it escapes into nature. Leakage is the technical term. And that is problematic because we are paying for our local governments or whoever's responsible for waste management to find solutions for an exponentially growing amount of trash. And that then comes in our rates. So we pay for bad design, which I think is pretty inequitable. And maybe this room is okay and you can afford to pay more rates, but for a lot of people, that actually really affects them. The more packaging we have, the more single-use products that we're being forced to use instead of reusable products is increasing the cost of living. And this is just one of many complex problems that we have in the sustainability arena, and it's definitely the problem we're going to be exploring today. So any complex problems is made up of a series of micro-actions. And the best thing for us to do, as anybody who's interested in helping to create a future that is better than today, is that we need to make sure the decisions and the solutions we put into play today do not become tomorrow's problems. One example of a great solution of the past is recycling. Recycling, wonderful idea, has not been executed in a very efficient way. In fact, only 9% of all plastics ever produced have ever been recycled. 9%. Globally, the World Bank assumes it's around 20% of all produced goods are actually ever recycled. Which, that's not that bad. But if you think about it, exponential growth in disposability, we're never going to have enough recycling to actually address the scale of the production. And it's complex. If you think about your cell phone, let me tell you right now, cell phones are crushed for the gold, because that's the most valuable part. They're not designed to be disassembled and to have their parts taken out. And right now we're having a discussion where all of the companies who are excited about AI are literally talking about how they're going to have $7 trillion worth of chip development. Where are all those raw materials going to come from? Let me tell you, deep sea ocean mining, natural places where presently 80% of the world's natural spaces are protected by only 5% of the population, and that is mainly indigenous communities. And we have this new thing called green colonization, which is where companies that are racing to electrify are going to these pristine natural environments and they're justifying the extraction of the materials we need in order to transition our economy to save us from climate change. But if we destroy nature, I can tell you now, we will not be fixing climate change because we'll be long gone. We are nature. It is so important that we not only protect and conserve, but that we value and contribute back to it. So what we're trying to do today, in the time we have together, is to not get overwhelmed and depressed, which I can see some of you might be feeling that right now. Usually midway through any of my talks, I'm like, it's going to get better, guys, don't worry, we're in this together. I'm actually a massive optimist. I fully believe that we as a species have the capacity to transform our economy and our society to be equitable and sustainable, otherwise I would not be able to get out of bed in the morning. I also truly believe that the biggest challenge we face is having enough skilled, capable, and intelligent people investing their skills in this space. LinkedIn releases a report every year about the green skills gap, and it's huge. They look at all of the job postings for people with sustainability skills where they can actually address these issues, and then they look at people's CVs, and there's a massive gap. Because we're not equipping people, we're not training people at universities in this stuff, in the technical side, environmental impact assessment, how to think in systems, how to understand complex problems. In my view, every single problem holds its own solution. And maybe that's just because I learned to be a designer, and as a designer you just like breaking things to put them back together in better ways. So you have this kind of innate thing where any complex problem is just an opportunity to explore an innovation. And to that end, over 10 years ago, I developed a method to help people quickly solve complex problems. It's called the disruptive design method, and I'm going to run you through it today. I like to call it a scaffolding, a little bit like how a building goes up. You need to create this exoskeleton that supports the building. And as you create the structure inside, you get to a point where you no longer need the exoskeleton. So this is a temporary learning experience that gives you the skills to address complex problems in really strategic ways. The DDM is based on this concept of disruption, which I'm sure you've all heard of, but I'm not talking about disruption, Silicon Valley style, Clay Christensen disruptive innovation, which is great, love it. I'm talking about disruption as an intentional act to transform a system. Now, in order to do that well, you need to understand the system and its complexity and relationships. So what we're going to be focusing on today is systems thinking. Has anyone here done or engaged with systems thinking as a practice? Excellent. Love it. My systems nerds. Isn't it the best thing ever? truly. Hopefully, you will all agree after our time together this morning. So we want to disrupt the status quo of an unsustainable system by understanding what's going on within it and then ideating the points of intervention and creating solutions that are going to disrupt we say disrupt the status quo, but essentially what we're looking at is how things fit together. Think of a jigsaw puzzle that you could throw out and reconfigure in a different way. There are 3 stages to the disruptive design method. The first is mining. It's intentionally a construction metaphor, so it's easy to remember. Mining is about going deep into the problem. I've been teaching innovation for a very, very long time, and what I've learned is that most people rush to solve the problem because they get a dopamine hit out of it. Especially if you've got little post-it notes. I don't know what it is about post-it notes that give people a frickin' dopamine hit, but let me tell you. So my goal is to get you to suspend the need to solve long enough so that you actually are curious about the problem. Because you need to spend some time not knowing a solution to actually understand what's going on. So in the mining phase, we go deep under the problem, we look for all the bits and pieces, and then we bring them up to the surface, and that's when we transition into the landscaping phase, which is where we map the system, get that bird's eye view, where we come up that complexity. You know when you're in the plane and you can see the landscape that you know from the ground in a very different way? And there, once we've put those pieces together to understand the relationships and the complexity, we can identify points of intervention that we could then design a solution that builds a disruption in that system. So that's what we're going to learn today. It's actually based on 12 different parts of, I did a PhD in this, and it's essentially like cognitive science and gamification and lots of really fun things, but obviously I don't have the time to teach you all of that today. But basically the process is extrapolating a lot of these approaches, and we're going to go through the experience focusing on my absolute favorite topic, which is the circular economy, which I'm going to share a little bit more with you in a second. I'm going to cover a lot of stuff, and hopefully, if I can do my job right, by the end of this, you're going to all be problem lovers, not problem avoiders. And for me, a problem lover is someone who is willing to take their problem on a date. How do you behave on a date? Let me tell you, there's 2 ways. There's the a-hole way, which is where you just do all the talking and none of the questioning. Don't do that. It's terrible. The other one is where you ask questions and you listen to the person's response and you actually spend time trying to learn about them. You're curious. You're open. You're inquisitive. How good are these skills? These are the skills that we need when we come to problem solving, when we want to actually ask questions that are complicated and not judge until we've learnt enough to know what's really going on. Then you can judge. But until then, we are really looking at a problem as holding its own solutions, and so we're having those playful, curious mindsets that we had perhaps as a kid, but also that, well, you probably have it when you're going on a date because you want to figure out the person to decide if they're going to be good for you in your life. But here's the issue with humans. We all have a brain, which is a big problem for us. Like I said, I'm a sociologist, and I like to refer to the human brain as a hot mess. The more you understand about it, the more you know that we don't know much about it. They just did a study, actually. I just saw this morning, the first study ever where they MRI scanned a woman throughout pregnancy, and they show the grey matter shifts in the brain during pregnancy. It's crazy. Anyone who's had a baby, that baby brain thing is apparently a really scientifically proven thing now. But here we are. We all are owners of one, I hope. Nope. Okay. Not this morning. I wish I could actually, I should write a book called the Owner's Manual to the Human Brain, because these things, these beautiful, complex things, are riddled with cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are these mistakes in human decision-making. I call them glitches. The craziest thing about them, there's hundreds of them that neuroscientists, behavioral economists, sociologists have uncovered over the years. It doesn't matter where you grew up, it doesn't matter what language you speak, it doesn't matter what culture you were raised in, you have the same cognitive biases as your fellow humans, which is pretty crazy. We have the same glitches. Does anyone know a common cognitive bias they want to share? No? Yeah, what's that? Recency bias, what happens? Exactly. It's actually also called the anchoring effect. Yeah, so when you have an experience, it becomes almost like the central force that all other experiences are viewed through. So there's hundreds of them, as I mentioned. Some of my favorite, confirmation bias. This is where you seek out information that reaffirms what you already believe. Next time you're Googling, have a little reflective moment about what you're not clicking on, because I almost guarantee you are not clicking on information that is information you don't want to see. Which means that we seek out things that reinforce what we already believe. Oh, and what's crazy, there's one called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is named after the two scientists who found it, and that is where, this one is great, so that is where people who don't know something will actively avoid experiences that give them the opportunity to be aware of the fact that they don't know it. So they become very righteous in their ignorance, essentially. I'm sure we all have friends and family in that camp. Status quo bias. Humans, we're social animals. We cannot help but find ways of maintaining the status quo. I work in corporations. I see this so often, where the culture that was seeded at some point in a company is just replicated over and over again, and the new person coming in identifies some sort of toxic status quo, but they can't do anything because the system wants to preserve itself for its own benefit. I don't know if you could think of any other big picture problems that's like. Maybe you've got some experience with and you might be executing your citizen design role in the next few weeks. Anchoring effect. This one I think is hilarious. So it's a bit similar to the one that was just mentioned, but this is where a piece of information anchors you in it. It often happens with pricing, and then you are so anchored in that original piece of information that anything else annoys you or frustrates you. So if you get told something is going to be $10, but then you go to the checkout and it's $20, ooh, right? You're anchored in that original experience. And that means that then our whole perception of that experience is transformed. This is often used to manipulate people. You know, it's great if you can show someone one thing and then when you're getting them to check out or do something else, like in an online website, you can actually make them think they're getting a deal when they're not. So it's quite common for prices to be set higher, but then when you feel like you're getting a deal. We've all fallen into this one. Loss aversion, it is cognitively double the neurological pain to lose something than it is to gain. If you lose $100 on the street, it will sting for twice as long as if you found it. We have negativity bias, which is we can't help but seek out information that is negative, that's doom scrolling, and then we have what's the opposite of negative? Nope, it starts with O. Optimism bias. Thank you, guys. Whew. Had my own little brain glitch in real time. So that one's crazy because it's where, when we're confronted with a really scary reality for ourselves, like, oh, I don't know, a climate-fueled disaster, our brains, because our brains are engineered to keep us alive and happy, believe it or not, is actually going to tell us, don't worry, it might be bad, but you'll be okay. We can run, we can hide, I don't know, we can build a bunker in Hawaii. So that bias, I don't know why I'm having a glitch on this. Optimism bias, thank you. Optimism bias means that a lot of people ignore the complex reality of the problems around them because they think they're going to be okay. And cognitive dissonance, which is hilarious. This is where there's a gap between people's perceived actions and their actual actions, and there's a discomfort. So what happens is when somebody is confronted with the disconnect between what they say they're going to do and what they actually do, it's more likely they'll change their opinion than their actions because it's so uncomfortable. And this happens a lot with people's behaviors towards the environment. We see that, people are like, I always recycle, it's great, but then when they're actually confronted, they'll say, oh, well, recycling's bad. Really? Leyla told me. It is actually not a great solution, I have to say. And we're social beings. We are literally engineered to be to have other people like us. All of our neurological wiring is to be accepted. So we do all these crazy things to ensure that we are maintaining the status quo of our social group and community so that they don't ostracize us. Wow, I'm really losing my words. What's happening? And social norms are such a powerful force. They can have incredible control over our cognitive experience. They can prevent us from actually thinking differently or imagining an alternative future that we could contribute to getting towards, because our culture says, no, that's not a right thing to do. But as a woman standing in front of you, I'm pretty grateful for the fact that there were some women, a few, maybe 100 or so years ago who decided the status quo needed to be disrupted and that women should have the right to vote and that we should be able to contribute to society because it turns out we have a lot to offer. And that was a status quo and a social norm that required courage and full-on disruption of the system to ensure that we have a better outcome. And there are many challenges today that could benefit from the same type of courage. But what I see over and over again is that people invest a lot of time, money, and energy in solving the wrong problem right. And let me tell you, you can do wrong problem righting and you will never get to a better outcome. It's much better to be solving the right problem incorrectly over and over again because you iteratively get to a better outcome. So the first and most important thing is to actually understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. And in order to do that, you need to understand the complexity of what makes it. Now, in systems thinking, we have this thing called the iceberg model, which I'm sure you've all heard over and over again, and it has a particular role in systems thinking, which is about going from the surface to the substance. And actually, this is a worksheet from I'm not going to get you to do this today, but I'm just showing you one of the ways we do this. What I'm actually going to dive into with you is doing systems thinking, but I need to lay out the context because once I get you up, I'm not going to have you back sitting in my captive web. So basically, systems thinking is a tool for understanding connections and relationships. It is fundamentally built on the idea that everything is interconnected and interdependent, which is a biophysical reality of nature, but also of human experience. Systems thinking got popularity in the mid-19th century out of MIT. You have a lot of people who are quite well known there. It's bred cybernetics, the internet. But the systems thinking we're going to do is about rewiring your brain to love complexity and to be able to quickly understand how relationships exist within a system. This is very intuitive for a lot of people, but particularly intuitive for anyone who was raised in an indigenous or land-based experience because it's relational. So what happens is most of us focus on the obvious part of a system, the event, or the outcome, or the cause. But actually, if you're embedded in a system, if you're responsive to the system around you, you start to understand the patterns, the structures, and ultimately the perspectives or mental models that reinforce those things. So in systems thinking and in the disruptive design method, we're always diving down under the surface to get to those, some people call it root causes, but I like to call it like the kind of system at play. It is truly like the Matrix, you know the scene where everything is like, it is that, hopefully you'll all get there. Essentially, the iceberg model gives us this constant encouragement to be not just blaming the obvious part. How many times have you heard someone say, the problem is, and then make a statement that's really freaking obvious? So that is like banned in my world. If you want to come up with a problem statement, you have to also come up with a question. So why is it like that? What's going on? What are the systems that are reinforcing that? What are the patterns that are making that system be that way? And how can we understand it so we can actually contribute to changing it? Systems are a set of things that work together to form a particular function interconnected to a complex whole. Let me tell you now, absolutely every single thing in this world is a system. Everything is dependent on something else in order to exist. We do not have isolated heaps, we have interconnected systems. And we need to be able to understand the scenario so we get that bigger picture perspective so that when we come to solve a problem, we have that infinite possibility of the universe sitting there, but we're also grounded in the reality of the earth that we're on. So think overview effect, back down to the ground. I like to call this the ability to think through telescopes and microscopes. Telescope, microscope, telescope, microscope. What's the cool thing about looking between those two instruments? When you look at the infinite possibility of the universe, you see a quadrillion stars dotted around. And when you look inside a petri dish of a single drop of water, you'll see the same thing. Nature just repeats the pattern. But the ability to think in this dynamic, three-dimensional way gives you the tools to understand complexity and not be overwhelmed. But let me tell you, I've taught systems thinking to like tens of thousands of people, and most people do get a little overwhelmed, so I'm going to give you a quick hack. Think about learning to swim in a swimming pool rather than the ocean. Right? When you learn to swim, the ocean is the infinite possibility of the universe filled with, in my country, a lot of things that kill you. But the swimming pool has edges. Oh, the safety of the edge to grip onto. The shallow end. So when you start this, you want to always have a boundary. In systems dynamics, we call it system boundary. It's where you define the edge of what you're exploring so that you don't fall into the ocean. And then when you get good at it and it's very intuitive, you can go swimming, you can go marathon for all I care. But start in the swimming pool because it helps you build that muscle, that mental muscle of experiencing complexity and not being overwhelmed. Because let me tell you, I didn't even get into the limbic system in the brain and the whole issue with the fight or flight response, the fear that often disables a lot of people. So I have to rush through this next bit so we have enough time to do the workshop. So you all okay if I go at like a hyperspeed? You speak the same language as me, guys. I usually do this talk in countries where it's like English is a second language. They're like, what is happening to me? Help. So, all right, I'm going to give you a quick rundown on the circular economy because that's what you're going to be working on. And I just want to make sure that we all understand what's going on. So sustainability, I'm sure you've heard of. It's a technical framework for understanding and harmonizing the social, economic, and environmental impacts of the actions we do. It's been long-standing. It's got multiple facets, but technically, it's a technical skill where you use science to understand impacts. Now, there's common myths about both sustainability and the circular economy, and they kind of overlap, but the circular economy is commonly thought of as being about recycling, about resource efficiency. It's something that only like one part of your company does, or it costs too much money. I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about the myths that exist, but I'm just going to tell you exactly what it is. The circular economy is a movement that is being spearheaded by governments. My government in Australia has committed to a circular economy and is developing a policy. I was just in the Philippines. Their government's developing a policy. China has had one. The whole of the European Union has it. The circular economy is a transition away from the current linear economy of extraction, manufacturing, and end of life, where we are exploiting nature for economic gain without accounting for the impacts. The alternative is to design a system where everything is intentionally cycled by design so that we are maximizing the utility of the resources. In fact, there are three main goals, and this is the three goals of the circular economy. The first is to eliminate waste. It's not to reduce, it's to eliminate, so that we get to a point where we do not have disposability built in and that is an addictive part of the system. The next is to extend the usable life of products and services, because once it's already made, all that value is locked into that. So that often requires us to design products to be intentionally cycled through the system in multiple use cases. And then the last is to regenerate natural systems. If you do the other two, by default, we regenerate systems. But the active regeneration is to understand impacts and to ensure that you are giving back more than you take. That's that nature positive stuff I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of subsections in this. I'm not going to have the time. Maybe grab a photo because this might be useful for when we do the workshop. So these are some of the kind of questions or approaches that we use in the circular economy. And this is very much a design and engineering problem as much as it is a business model problem, because they have to work together. So we have to figure out how to design products and services to be circularized. The different biomaterials have to come online. And then, of course, the management system. So I talked about digital product passports. We also have this idea of asset management. What kind of technology is going to make it possible for producers to know what parts they have, bring them back and remanufacture them. There's really significant benefits to the economy. I can tell you now, sustainability done well does not cost you more money. It saves you money because you are ultimately being more efficient over time. You are creating a better relationship with your customers. You are ensuring the things you pay for are actually being used to their full maximum potential. Sustainability often costs you more when you hire a marketing manager to do it. Don't do that. Use science, guys. It really helps. And there's an amazing wealth of science in this space. I think what I've seen over the years is that a lot of companies that get into sustainability is they resource one small, tiny little department all the way over here, right? And they go, oh, that's the hippies, like to hug trees. They'll do something. Oh, now we have to do carbon reporting. Oh, we'll just give it to them. And then, oh, now we have to think about, resource conservation. Oh, we'll just give it to them. And this poor tiny team are like, help! I mean, the amount of sustainability teams that I have just seen burn out because they're lumped with technical, complex things. Think about sustainability as your finance department, but for the social and environmental impacts, not just the economic. That's really the goal. And that's where something which is very controversial in this country, ESG, has come online. But in Europe, they've mandated ESG. They have a new rule called Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which requires all companies to actually publicly report on the exposure to the ESG criteria. And any company who sells products into the European Union at a certain price point has to do it too. So the assumption is around 50,000 companies will be affected, and many of them are actually exposed in the US. So just a couple other technical things about the circular economy. The goal here is to mimic nature, and nature works on metabolisms. We are a metabolism, put food in, get some nutrients and some energy, We know what happens next, don't need to explain it, inputs and outputs, but ultimately, the system that we work within does not account for a lot of those inputs and outputs. So the metabolism, we're trying to work within two systems. One is we're designing for biological, so that is where we have anything that can be benignly absorbed back into nature, whether it's composting, biodigestion, whether it's escaping into nature. We have all these new materials. If you don't know about Nopla, you should look it up. Nopla is won the Prince's Earthshot Prize last year. It's a seaweed-based plastic that is chemically exactly like a banana peel. So you can use it and then it can just be in nature. They made these little like water in a little sack for runners, you know, when you're doing marathons, because you can, and then throw, because it just degrades. Whereas other bioplastics, actually have to go into an industrial process in order to be processed. So we're trying to figure out new materials. It's a huge innovation opportunity. I was just in the Philippines, really biodiverse place, and they've been making the materials out of pineapple, because you don't have to take the whole pineapple plant out and you have all of these fronds. I have shoes, not these ones, shoes made out of the material, you can use them. It's really cool, huge innovation opportunity. Agricultural waste being converted into biomaterials that fit within the circular economy. And then we have the technical sphere, which is all other products, anything that has been technically altered and it has materials that can't be benignly absorbed into nature. So most of our supply chains are in this space. But that means that we have to then design the system to take it back. I'll give you a couple examples. I have a lot of examples from Europe, guys, sorry, since I've done a lot of work there. There's a really big car manufacturer. They have like Alfa Romeo and Audi, and they decided to start taking their old cars back. Presently, they're just crushed for the metal and deconstructing them. They have a huge remanufacturing facility in Italy where they take all the parts out, check them, fix them, package them, resell them. Why should they have to make new ones? Right? So they save a significant amount of money. Then you have companies like Philips, the lighting company, who are now offering lighting as a service. This is actually a big part of the circular economy. It's called, it's got a product as service model, where essentially instead of selling one product that is going to be wasted and that you don't have any accountability for, you design a service delivery model where you are leasing the value of that product to your end user, but you are managing it across its life. And then you are getting multiple use cycles out of it. So in the case of Philips, if you've got a brand new building that you're doing, you would then have the service of lighting from them. They would come in and they would manage everything to do with your lighting. They'd have sensors, they'd be updating them, but they own the assets. So you don't have to worry about hiring a handyman or whoever it is or maintenance, but they are then incentivized to make longer lasting, more durable products because then they have a cost reduction. Do you see the incentive? It's actually kind of amazing. There are so many of these opportunities in reconfiguring the business model to deliver the circular outcome but still have that economic growth. So a lot of these levels of the circular economy are about prevention up front. How do we be more efficient? That's one way. But really it's about reconfiguring the way we deliver value into the economy by creating reuse systems, by developing repair and sharing models. So what happened in France last year is that they put in the world's first mandated repair law, which requires any technology to be self-assessed on a 10-point scale of how repairable their products are. So think your iPhone, how expensive and hard is it to get your iPhone repaired? Yeah? That's intentional. That's by design. But in France now, they got such a low score. I don't have a slide on this, guys, sorry. They got such a low score because basically you do the rating and then you get a 1 to 10 and then it gets stuck on the product and it's color-coded. So you look really bad, and it has to be displayed at every point of sale. And so for the first time ever, as a result of this law, Apple released their repair manuals. My friend runs iFixit, really cool organization in California. They build all the tools to help all the repair shops around the world, and they make all the manuals. I had a meeting with them right after this, and they're like, oh my gosh, all the manufacturers are freaking out. They're calling them like, how do we do repair? The French. It's such a huge market. And this is now going to be laws that we will have rolled out. We have a right to repair law here, but it doesn't apply to technology. It applies to other products. Anyway, you get the general point, right? So this is the circular economy in action. It is a business opportunity. It requires us to change the way we think about how we make money, how we deliver value into the economy, how we have a relationship with our customers. Critically, it changes the way we think about the system. And so that's why starting with the system is so important. And just quickly, before we get into the workshop, systems dynamics is all about understanding what happens within a system. And I can't go into all of it because it's quite complicated, but a few that are really important is delays. So when you take an action, there's always a delay to the impact or the outcome. So in the case, I love to use the case of showering because it's a universal experience, I hope. And that is, you know, that kind of moment where you get in the shower, especially if it's a shower you don't know very well, and you're trying to navigate the hot-cold dynamic, right? And depending on how far away the hot water system is to your little operational device will depend on how long you either are freezing or boiling, right? And you're going to have that feedback. So you've put it on, too cold, oh shit, you know, and then you play with it, and then you always overcorrect, don't you? You always go too hot or too cold. So there's this moment where you're in this dynamic with this system, and the delay is affecting your actions or outcomes. And this applies to every system. In fact, one of the really nice little nuggety rules in systems thinking is that cause and effect is not related in time or space, which means it's very hard to actually understand in the moment of making an action, designing an intervention, creating change, what kind of true effect will happen as a result of that. And the other key important thing is the concept of feedback loops, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But just to give a quick synopsis, in systems thinking there are two. There's balancing and reinforcing. A reinforcing one is a kind of exponential out of control one. A couple of examples are, of course, drug addiction. It's a reinforcing feedback loop. You need more of the substance in order to get the high, so you have more of the substance, etc. So it's going out of control. Whereas a balancing feedback loop is where the system maintains itself, homeostasis. Our bodies are a balancing feedback loop. And so what we're actually trying to do is understand what's going on in the system. There's a whole other series of stuff like systems archetypes. I've written extensively about this. If you guys are interested, if you just Google my name, you'll find I've got lots of guides online on how to think and use these tools. But today we're going to really dive into my favorite tool, which is systems mapping, which is where we're actually going to dissect or mine, as you've now learned, the bottom of the iceberg for this complex challenge of the circular economy. Okay? So what we're going to do is there's going to be 3 parts to this workshop, of which these delightful tables set up behind me are for you all. You're going to be going into your groups. So the organizers have beautifully defined all these native animals that you're going to be unified with. It's a random selection. And you have a facilitator who you'll be working with throughout the rest of the conference. But for the purpose of this morning's activity, your facilitator is just a participant as well. No power dynamics. In fact, everyone is a participant in this. If you're in this room, unless I don't sneak out because I can see you all, you have to participate, which means you're going to come down to the table and you're going to pick up a pen and you're going to contribute to developing a systems map. A systems map is literally a brain dump of everything related to the topic. This is an example. It's not a mind map, so you're not trying to go out like this. You're just throwing ideas down anywhere, and then you're drawing and connecting them. This is how messy it should look in about 15 minutes. And I give you points based on messiness. So the first phase, we're going to go down to the table, you're going to find your groups, and you're going to write in the middle of the large piece of paper, circular economy. That's all the theme we're exploring. And then you're going to spend about 5 minutes throwing your ideas down. Anything goes. You could write pineapple, you could write piglet, I don't care. The cool thing is that in the circular economy, in the systems thinking, everything is interconnected. So don't edit yourself. This is the one thing I noticed. We're like, I don't want to look bad. Anything goes, right? Everyone has to write and everything goes because we're trying to populate this page in a collaborative way with all of our ideas and perspectives so that we can start to draw connections between them. So once I come over and say you can move on, only once I come over, you can then start to draw lines that connect the different parts of the system. And over time, what will happen is you as a group will actually start to identify the common underlying structures of the things that are going on in this system. And then we will be moving on to the next phase, of which I'll stop you all to do. All right, does everyone understand? Is everyone excited? You get to use colored markers, guys, come on. So, instructions. Find your group. Your group name is on your badge. So what you want to do is you want to find other humans. The table